Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
How's everybody doing this morning?
Good.
Okay. Well, welcome to church. We are very glad that you are here this morning. For those who are listening from your vehicles outside, we are very glad that you are here. And for those who are homebound and listening to this online, we are very glad that you are here in that form as well. For anyone who hasn't met me, I am Ryan, and I am one of the pastors here at Mount Zion Baptist Church, and I would love to meet you before you leave here today. Here's a quick rundown of what we're going to do over the next couple of hours. First, we are going to spend some time worshiping the Lord through song. Then we are going to spend some time worshiping the Lord by studying His Word together. And finally, we are going to worship the Lord by breaking into something called community groups and spending some time fellowshipping together before dismissing at noon. And we are so glad that you are here to do all of this with us this morning, because we've gathered here this morning to worship the God who carefully designed us with love and joy. And when we rebelled against our loving designer in the beginning, that same love and joy that drove him to design us with care drove him to come down from heaven and sacrifice himself to save us through the cross. And because all of this is true, we want to welcome each other into this time of worship and celebration with a very specific welcome. By this point, you probably know it by heart, but we're going to read it from the screen together. To all who are weary and need rest, to all who mourn and long for comfort, to all who feel worthless and wonder if God cares, to all who fail and desire strength, to all who sin and need a Savior, this church opens wide her doors with a welcome from Jesus Christ, the lover of His enemies, the defender of the guilty, the justifier of the inexcusable, the friend of sinners. Welcome. Let's join together in prayer. Father, you are a God whose goodness is visible in all of the things that you have made. When we see the love that you have poured into the world around us, we cannot help but see a glimpse of your loving character. The care and precision with which you designed us drives us to worship you in love and gratitude. You have designed us in joy and for joy. You have designed us to flourish. You have designed us to be made whole through knowing you. And now we have gathered here to pour out our love and joy in worship at the foot of your glorious throne. So be glorified in our worship this morning. And all of God's people said, Amen. I will now turn it back over to Harley as she leads us in worship through song.
Would you stand and join us as we sing I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day?
Of The world revolved from night to day. A voice, a chime, a chant sublime. A peace on earth, goodwill to men. And the bells that ring like a choir they're singing. And in our hearts we'll hear them. Peace on earth, goodwill to men. Do you hear the bells that ringing? Like the angels singing. Open up your hearts and hear them. Peace on earth, goodwill to men. Peace on earth.
Okay. Well, you may be seated then. Skies don't seem to be as dark as usual. The stars seem brighter than they've been before. And deep within I feel my soul stirring, as though my hope has been restored. The shepherds say they've heard the voice of angels, confirming rumors spread across the land, that a child protected well from Herod's anger is the Father, Son, and the Son of Man. Love is raining down on the world tonight. There's a presence here, I can tell. God is in us, God is for us, God is with us, Emmanuel. He's the Savior we have been praying for. In our humble hearts He will dwell. God is in us, God is for us, God is with us, Emmanuel. I feel compelled to tell all who will listen that peace on earth is not so out of reach. If we can find grace, mercy, and forgiveness, He has come to save. He is all of these. Love is raining down on the world tonight. There's a presence here, I can tell. God is in us, God is for us, God is with us, Emmanuel. He's the Savior we have been You're the Savior we have been praying for. In our humble hearts you will dwell. You are in us. You are for us. You are with us. Emmanuel.
Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, we're going to do the children's church dismissal a little bit differently. We're going to do 3 things. Okay, first thing, if you are a teacher or if you know where you're helping children to Sunday school, would you please stand up? If you're a Sunday school teacher this week, would you please stand up for children's church? Children's church, I'm sorry. Yeah, for right now. Would you please stand up? All right, okay, second thing, children, would you please look at who's standing? All right, this is who you're going to follow. All right, third thing, children, please stand up and you're going to follow Miss Lisa. All right, good job, everyone, A+.
Good job, Lisa.
All right, thank you, Lisa. Sorry to embarrass you. All right. So it's almost Christmas, and that means it's the time of year where I wear this sweater, and you look at me, and you're like, that sweater looks really familiar. I think I've seen Ryan wear that. And that's true because my mom bought us matching sweaters because I hate matching, and she thought it would be funny. And so y'all can be thinking, like, who wore it best? Like, it's not a contest. So if you will turn with me to Psalm 104, verse 5 through 15. That's Psalm 104, verse 5 through 15. The psalmist says, "He set the earth on its foundations. It can never be moved. You covered it with the watery depths as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. But at your rebuke the waters fled. At the sound of your thunder they took to flight. They flowed over the mountains. They went down into the valleys, to the place you assigned for them. You set a boundary they cannot cross. Never again will they cover the earth. He makes springs pour water into the ravines. It flows between the mountains. They give water to all the beasts of the field. The wild donkeys quench their thirst. The birds of the sky nest by the waters. They sing among the branches. He waters the mountains from his upper chambers. The land is satisfied by the fruit of his work. He makes grass grow for the cattle and plants for the people to cultivate, bringing forth food from the earth. Wine that gladdens human hearts, oil to make their faces shine, and bread that sustains their hearts." This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you so much, Elise. Well, if I could get a quick show of hands, has anybody started losing their hearing with age yet? You used to be able to hear for a mile. Now you can barely hear somebody standing halfway across the room, right? I can relate. My ears don't really work right anymore, and I'm only 28. By 40, I'll probably have hearing aids. But that's because when I was growing up, I went to a lot of concerts. Anybody else go to a lot of concerts growing up? All right. When I was growing up, I went to a lot of concerts. Not the kind of concerts where a popular band comes to town and you have to pay $540 to stand behind a support beam and try to catch a glimpse of Taylor Swift by like craning your neck around, right? Now I went to a lot of concerts with bands that didn't draw much of a crowd. You know what I'm talking about? Kind of band you drive an hour out to some dive bar to go see. It only costs you $30 to get in, and only about 80 other people show up, so you can stand wherever you want. That's the kind of concert I grew up going to. That's the best kind of concert to go to. Problem is, you could stand wherever you want, and I always wanted to stand right next to the speaker system. Now that's the most exciting place to be in the moment. But what happens when you stand right by the speaker system for 3 straight hours? Blows your eardrums out, right? And if you go to enough concerts and stand directly next to the speakers, eventually you'll have a hard time hearing. You'll get 28 years old and have the hearing of a 78-year-old, right? And so my low register hearing is almost completely gone, which means that if your voice is within a certain frequency range, I cannot hear you when you talk. And it just so happens that the dead frequency range that I can't hear is almost exactly the frequency range they seem to mix most TV show dialogue to. Which means that when I'm watching TV, I can hear the music perfectly, but I have no clue what anybody is saying. Which means that I'm one of those people who has to have the subtitles on for pretty much everything. Anybody else can't hear without the subtitles? I gotta watch everything with the subtitles on. People will be like, I don't watch foreign films because I don't want to read while I'm watching TV. And I'll be like, some of us never had a choice. But a few years ago, something started happening. It got harder and harder to read the subtitles. I had to get closer and closer to the TV in order to read the subtitles, to the point that Elise was like, are you going to eat your dinner 6 inches from the TV screen? Is that what we're doing now? So she made me go to the eye doctor. Now, I hadn't been to the eye doctor in probably 15 years. My mom swears she took me to the eye doctor all the way through my 18th birthday, but I have no memory of this, which either means she did not take me to the eye doctor or something really bad happened at the eye doctor. You decide which. But I go to the eye doctor, I'm pretty sure, for the first time in like 15 years, and it is a mind-bending experience. It started out normal. You know, I get there and he does all the eye doctor stuff. He has me read from the chart, right? Has me put on the little lens switcher binoculars thing. Does anybody know what that's actually called? I don't even think it has a name, right? It's the lens switcher binoculars thing. But at the end, he says, well, Ryan, I've found what your problem is. You're really far-sighted in one eye, and you're really nearsighted in the other. They call that condition anisometropia, and only about 2 or 3% of the people in the world have it. He said, you're far-sighted in one eye, and you're nearsighted in the other eye. That's why you have a lazy eye. I said, I have a lazy eye? And he said, oh, nobody loved you enough to tell you. He said, chances are you've had a lazy eye forever, but you've been manually straining your eyes for years to keep them both straight. Problem is, whenever you relax, your left eye drifts off into outer space. So I was like, okay, doc, what do we need to do? And he said, well, for $15,000, we could slice into your eyeball with a tiny laser machine and melt it into a different shape so your vision will be better. Or you could buy a special $80 pair of glasses. And I said, tell me more about these glasses. So I got the weirdest glasses in the world. He said, not just any glasses will do. One lens magnifies everything to help with my nearsightedness. One lens shrinks everything to help with my farsightedness. He said it's not enough to just magnify your vision to fix the deficiencies in your left eye, because your left eye would just, or your right eye would just counteract it. And it's not enough to just shrink your vision to counteract the deficiencies in your right eye, because your left eye would just counteract it. He said you need a specially designed prescription. He said you need a perfectly designed pair of glasses to suit your condition. He said you need something finely tuned to meet your unique needs. And in a really strange way, our universe is kind of like my weird lazy eye prescription glasses. It's uniquely designed to support intelligent life like ours. It's finely tuned to lead to the development of human life. It's perfectly tweaked to make life as we know it possible. This is now the fourth week of our brand new series called Why We Believe. So I guess it's not brand new anymore. But throughout this series, we're going to talk about why we believe that Jesus truly is the way, the truth, and the life in a way that no one else in the universe can claim to be. Over the next couple months, we're going to learn about how what we can know through science generally points us towards God rather than away from Him. We're going to talk about how what we can know through archaeology pretty consistently confirms that the Bible is reliable and trustworthy. We're going to talk about the way that historians have demonstrated that Jesus really did rise from the dead and how that shows us that He really is who He says He is, and so much more. Because when you take an honest look at the evidence God has left for us in the universe, the breadcrumb trail leads directly back to Him. And this week we are going to continue exploring just one of those reasons that we can know that that is true. Specifically, we want to spend this morning talking about how the complex, intricate, and orderly design of the universe testifies to the designer of the universe. Once again, the complex, intricate, and orderly design of the universe testifies to the designer of the universe. But how exactly does the complex, intricate, and orderly design of the universe point us towards the designer of the universe? I think the easiest way to wrap our heads around it is through a really dumb analogy. Get ready. The really dumb analogy that I think helps us here is this. Imagine for a moment that you woke up one day and found yourself on an abandoned island. If that's a recurring nightmare that you have, I apologize for bringing it back. But imagine that you woke up on an abandoned island. You've read about this island before. Nobody lives here. Nobody's allowed to live here. It's a ghost town. Imagine you wake up on this abandoned island and you start looking around. Now, imagine that while you're looking around this abandoned island, you find a patch of sand that is shaped like the letter C. What would you think? Probably wouldn't think much of anything, right? You'd say, that kind of looks like the letter C. But it's probably just a coincidence, right? Like a patch of sand that kind of looks like the letter C doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's not that hard to imagine any number of things that could have randomly molded the sign or the sand into sort of looking like the letter C. But now imagine something else. Imagine that you kept walking, and a mile later you found another patch of sand. But this patch of sand was somehow perfectly arranged to look like Keanu Reeves' face. Now what would you think? You think something's up, right? You'd say, I think there might be someone else here. And I guess they're excited about the new John Wick movie. Because it's a little bit harder to imagine a patch of sand randomly arranging itself to look like the face of a 58-year-old actor, right? But we're not quite done yet. Because now I want you to imagine that you kept walking and that 2 miles later you found another patch of sand, and that this patch of sand had an entire paragraph from the Communist Manifesto written in it. Now what would you think? You'd say, I am definitely not alone on this island, right? Because that is too complex to have happened randomly. That is too precise to have been unguided. That is too intricate to have been accidental, isn't it? And once again, that's a really dumb analogy, but it illustrates a really simple principle in action. And that is that when you find something complex, intricate, and orderly, it almost always means that it has a designer. Right? Complex, intricate, and orderly things are almost always the result of some sort of designer. Think about it for a second. Case in point, if you were living in the 1800s and you found a hand watch on the ground in an open field, what would you assume? Would you assume that hand watch had just always been there? Would you assume that the hand watch randomly grew out of the ground alongside the grass that it was sitting on? No, you would say someone dropped this here, right? I need to find whoever owns this hand watch and give it back to them because it's the 1800s and hand watches are expensive. That is exactly what you would say, right? You would say someone dropped this here. Why would you assume that? I'll tell you why. It's because even the simplest old school 1800s hand watch is unbelievably complex, intricate, and orderly. You would get one look at the intricate mechanics of this hand watch and you would instantly know that someone must have designed it, right? So when you find it in an open field, you would say, this is not just a really special rock. Somebody must have dropped this here. In very much the same way, when you open up the hood of a modern car, you know that there is no way the parts just randomly flung together during the last hurricane, right? You get one look at the intricate machinery that makes it run, and you would immediately know that someone must have designed it. Why? Because complex, intricate, and orderly things are almost always the result of some sort of designer. And that same principle applies to us, too. A case in point, the human ear only works because hundreds of tiny bones perfectly fit together so that they can translate the incoming sound waves into a nerve that communicates with your brain. In other words, the only reason you are hearing this sentence right now is because your ear is perfectly sculpted to interact with your nervous system and carry the raw data coming out of my mouth into your brain's interpretive center. The sheer complexity of a bodily system like that is absolutely astounding. And if the complex, intricate, and orderly mechanics of a hand watch or a car tell us that someone must have designed them, why would we assume it's any different with us? Complex, intricate, and orderly things are almost always the result of some sort of designer. And that has really important consequences for how we think about the universe as a whole. Because when you see the minute cogs in each of these fairly simple machines, you realize how wildly unlikely it is that they just randomly formed by some unguided process. But our universe is infinitely more complex, intricate, and orderly than any of these things. In fact, one of the things that you come to realize as you begin to look more deeply at the world around us is that to support any sort of life whatsoever, our universe had to be perfectly finely tuned. Like new developments in the field of modern physics and cosmology and quantum mechanics and biochemistry over the last few years or so, we've discovered that life in our universe depends on an unbelievably delicate balance of conditions that all hold each other steady. And that if any one of them were slightly changed, the balance would be destroyed and life could never exist. There are hundreds of examples of this. We're going to name 4. So example number 1. For the universe to support life, the force of gravity had to be perfectly finely tuned. If the force of gravity were a tiny bit stronger, it would have pulled all the newly formed atoms together into a gigantic clump, and the universe could never have developed. We wouldn't have gotten past the Big Bang. And if the force of gravity had been a tiny bit weaker, the expansion of the universe would have spread the newly formed atoms so widely they could never have been gathered into stars and galaxies. Stephen Hawking put it this way. He said, if the rate of the universe's expansion 1 second after the Big Bang had been smaller by even 1 part in 100,000 million. Did you know that was a number? The universe would have recollapsed into a hot fireball. That's example number 1. For our universe to support life, the force of gravity had to be perfectly finely tuned. Here's example number 2. For our universe to support life, the distance between our planet and the sun had to be perfectly fine-tuned. If we were any closer to the sun, the spectral temperature would sterilize and then destroy us. If we were any further away from the sun, the chemical reactions necessary to produce and sustain life would have happened too slowly to support life for any length of time. That's example number 2. For our universe to support life, the distance between our planet and the sun had to be perfectly fine-tuned. Here comes example number 3. For our universe to support life, the energy levels found within each element on the periodic table had to be perfectly fine-tuned. Life in our universe is carbon-based. But carbon can only come into being when 3 helium atoms collide with each other and fuse together. But if the energy levels aren't calibrated perfectly, the helium atoms just bounce off each other and never form into carbon. So the energy levels have to be precisely tweaked so that carbon can develop. That's example number 3. For our universe to support life, the energy levels found within each element on the periodic table had to be perfectly fine-tuned. And here's example number 4. For our universe to support life, the mass ratio between protons and electrons had to be perfectly fine-tuned. I know we're getting really nitty-gritty now, but that's kind of the point, right? The mass of a proton, anybody know off the top of your head? I wouldn't have either. But the mass of a proton is precisely 1,836.15267,389 times the mass of an electron. And if that ratio changed by 1 single decimal point, it would have become impossible for the atoms to fuse into molecules, which would cause the universe to disintegrate into a stagnant void of empty non-matter. That is example number 4. For our universe to support life, the mass ratio between protons and electrons had to be perfectly fine-tuned. These are 4 examples out of several hundred overwhelmingly complex, intricate, and precise conditions that have to line up perfectly in order for our universe to function at all. And when you start to calculate the probability of all those conditions lining up with perfect precision to make life in our universe possible, it's kind of unbelievable. According to the British physicist Paul Davies, the odds against the initial conditions being suitable for later star formation, without which planets could not exist, is a 1 followed by 1,000 billion zeros at least. Did you know that was a number? Now that was a bunch of abstract sciencey stuff all at once. You might have glazed over for the last 5 minutes, and if that's the case, that's fine. I get it. But here's a maybe less overwhelming way of thinking about everything we just talked about. Imagine you were playing poker with your friends. I know it's hard to get a room full of Baptists to admit that they play poker, but pretend you did, right? Imagine you were playing poker with your friends, and your friend got a royal flush the first hand of the game. What would you think? Well, hold on. If you were a charitable individual, like myself, you would think, wow, that was a lucky hand, right? The odds of getting a royal flush from a standard deck of cards with no funny business involved is roughly 1 in 31,000. It's unusual, but it happens. But imagine if you dealt again, right? Everybody went around, and when your friend's second turn came up, he laid down another royal flush. Now what are you thinking? You're starting to get suspicious, right? Because the odds of getting 2 royal flushes in a row is roughly 1 in 957 million. It has happened before, but it is profoundly unlikely. But we're not done yet. Because now imagine that you bit your tongue, dealt again, everybody takes their turn, and when your friend's third turn comes around, he lays down a third royal flush. Now, before you jump to any conclusions, before you do any of the math, right, let's just keep the hypothetical going and say that you dealt again, everybody took their turn, and when your friend's fourth turn came around, he laid down a fourth royal flush in a row. Now, it's literally not possible to get 5 royal flushes in a row. Anybody know why? There aren't enough of each card in a deck for that to happen, right? But pretend for a second that you could. And imagine that on your 5th turn, your friend laid down his 5th royal flush in a row. What would you be thinking about right now? What would you be doing right now? You'd be hitting your friend's knuckle with a hammer trying to get him to fess up, right? Because the odds of being dealt 5 royal flushes in a row are literally 1 in 28 sextillion. Did you know that was a number? That is a number so big they had to put the word sex in it. The chances of getting 5 royal flushes in a row is literally 1 in 28 sextillion. But if anybody had big money riding on this poker game, your friend is getting killed. Right? He's getting thrown in the river because there is no way he got 5 royal flushes in a row fair and square. You would say he has to have cheated. Here's the thing, though. We're going to shift back from poker to abstract sciencey stuff for a minute. Because when you look at all of the overwhelmingly intricate and complex conditions that had to line up with perfect precision to make life in our universe possible, it is not like getting 5 royal flushes in a row. It's like getting 500 royal flushes in a row. And in exactly the same way that laying down 500 royal flushes in a row would demand an explanation that goes beyond pure chance, the overwhelmingly complex, intricate, and precise fine-tuning of our universe demands an explanation that goes beyond pure chance. If the complexity and intricacy and orderliness of a picture of Keanu Reeves and a paragraph from the Communist Manifesto written in the sand are evidence that somebody designed them, then the infinitely greater degree of complexity, intricacy, and orderliness that we find in ourselves and our universe are evidence that somebody designed us. To the point that the renowned physicist Freeman Dyson once said that the more I examine the universe and the details of its architecture, the more evidence I find that the universe in some sense must have known that we were coming. To the point that the NASA astrophysicist John O'Keefe went even further. He wrote that if the universe had not been made with the most exacting precision, we could never have come into existence. It is my view that these circumstances indicate that the universe was created for man to live in. I like the way that the British astrophysicist Fred Hoyle put it. He said, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. He's saying that the complex, intricate, and orderly design of the universe testifies to the designer of the universe. And just like last week, all we've really done today is scratch the surface. But as we continue to scratch the surface together, we are slowly piecing together an image of our designer who is beginning to look suspiciously like the God of the Bible. In the passage that Elise read to us about 20 minutes ago at the beginning of the sermon, the psalmist says that we were intricately, carefully, and lovingly designed by God. The Bible says the Lord created our inmost being. It says he knit us together. It says he wove us together. He laid our frame. He turned our unformed bodies into what they are today. He ordained our days. He says the Lord set the earth on its foundations. He set the borders of the waters that cover it. He mapped out the pathway that the rivers and springs and tributaries and ravines would take to keep the earth in perfect balance. He set the pattern that the plant life would take, cycling through seasons of growth and harvest. He says that God even created things like wine that are meant to gladden the human heart if you catch his drift. Oh, y'all didn't think that was funny. But in all of this is a beautiful design. The universe was intricately, carefully, and lovingly designed by God. And we see the overwhelming care and love with which God intricately designed us more clearly than anywhere else in the cross. Because in the same way that God's deep love for us drove him to intricately design us in joy and for joy, so also his deep love for us drove him to take our sin onto himself and pay the price for us in the cross. God's unimaginable care for us drove him to make the ultimate sacrifice for us by taking the just wrath that we deserved onto himself and nailing it to the cross. This is the God that we meet in the Bible. And when we take an honest look around at the world around us, he's the God that the complex, intricate, and orderly design of the universe points us to as well. And so our application throughout this whole series is very simple, but maybe very difficult. Keep an open mind. If you are someone who isn't so sure about all this God stuff, suspend your disbelief for a little while and pray that this designer would reveal himself to you. Pray that this designer that science points us towards would work through the doubts you've held on to through the years. Pray that this designer that science points us towards would make himself known to you. That one day you wouldn't just know about him by way of the breadcrumb trail that he's left behind, but that you know him through Jesus Christ. And then come back next week as we take a short break from this series. And Addison shares a little bit with us about the unconditional love that this designer has for us in his first sermon ever here at Mount Zion. Pray that God would give you an open mind about the breadcrumb trail that he's left for us. Let's join together in prayer. Lord, there is no one like you. The careful, brilliant, loving design present within our universe cries out your name. The world around us is preaching a message to us about you, and we have heard the message that you've written in the universe. We've seen your handwriting. We've captured a glimpse of who you are based on what you've done, and we are captivated. The glimpses you have given us push us to want to know you more deeply, and you have made that possible through the cross. So now we are gathered around you to lift you up in worship and celebration because you are gloriously worthy of our worship and celebration. So be glorified in our worship and our fellowship this morning. And all of God's people said, Amen. If you would now stand as we respond in worship through song.
Christmas all around me, so why is Christmas hard to find? December snow is falling down like I am to my knees. I could use some hope right now, 'cause right now hope is hard to see. Help me still believe. For God so loved this broken world, He sent His only Son to carpenter and teenage girl to show us all His love. He left His home in heaven to make heaven my home. My Emmanuel is with me, and I'll never be alone. Down here my heart can't find words to believe in, but I still believe in Christmas. Oh, I still believe in healing for the weary and the hurting. And in a world that's so divided, I still believe in peace on earth. I still believe that love is strong enough to conquer hate. And in a world that won't believe it, I still believe enough to say, for God so loved this broken world, He sent His only Son to a carpenter and a teenage girl to show us all His love. He left His home in heaven to make heaven my home. My Emmanuel is with me, and I'll never be alone. Down here my heart can't find words to believe in, but I still believe in Christmas. I still believe in Christmas. I still believe in Jesus, the name above all names, a Savior in a manger, and a star that leads the way. Help us all believe. For God so loved this broken world, He sent His only Son to a carpenter and a teenage girl to show us all His love. He left His home in heaven to make heaven my home. My Emmanuel is with me, and I'll never be alone. Down here my heart can't find words to believe in, but I still believe in Christmas. I still believe in Christmas.
A handful of announcements before we break into our community groups. First things first, we want our new Why We Believe series to be as helpful to you as possible. And in order to do that, we need your help. We've placed a small box in the front doorway of the church with a set of pens and some slips of paper. You might have seen it as you were walking in. And we invite you to write down your questions, your doubts, your uncertainties, your confusions about the faith. Like we said in our first sermon of this series, a biblically healthy church welcomes and addresses questions and doubts rather than shutting them down and shunning them. And so we want to know, what parts of the faith do you struggle with? What are some things that make it difficult for you to believe what the Bible tells us about God? What are some things that challenge your faith? We invite you to write down your questions, your doubts, your uncertainties, your confusions, and drop them anonymously in the box out front. And what we're going to do is take those questions we see popping up again and again and again, and we're going to go out of our way to tackle them in the second half of this series. Second, there are no midweek activities for the rest of December. That means no Wednesday night prayer meeting, no Wednesday night children and youth, no Friday morning Bible study for the rest of the month and the rest of the year. We will pick up our midweek activities back in January. Third, we will be having a Sunday morning service on December 25th and January 1st. However, there will be no community groups after the service. No donuts and fellowship before the service, unfortunately, and no children's church those 2 weeks. We'll be having a simplified 1-hour main service with all of us together in the sanctuary. Things will be completely back to normal beginning January 8th. And fourth, all this month, we are taking up money for the Lottie Moon Christmas offering to help fund missionary work overseas with the International Mission Board. Over here on this tree, you've noticed there are more ornaments every single week. It just keeps growing. That is because for every $25 we are able to take up for the Lottie Moon Christmas offering, we add another ornament to the tree. Our current goal is 500, and we have a ways to go before we get there, so we strongly encourage you to give to the Lottie Moon Christmas offering this year if you feel led. You can make your offering in the plate in the back with a specially marked envelope. And lastly, I wanted to share just a little bit about Bertha's funeral arrangements. I spoke with Tom Clancy yesterday on the phone, and to my understanding, her funeral is going to be Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock. I believe it will be a graveside service out in the back where she's going to be buried. We would love to see all of you there to pay your final respects to her. Are there any other announcements that need to be made that I missed? Going once? Going twice? Okay. Well, you are now dismissed to your community groups. If you identify as a younger adult, you're going to go to this room right to my right over here. If you identify as an older adult, you are going to meet in the fellowship hall. If you are a youth student, you are going to follow Addison into the room over here in the back to my left.